The young and the restless spoilers. The Mediterranean sun had barely risen over the cliffs of Nice when Chancellor stood alone at the edge of the chateau's upper balcony, the waves crashing far below offering a soft counterpoint to the tension building in his chest. He wasn't just a guest at the Newman Dumas summit, he was now the only shield standing between a man marked for death and the shadows gathering to deliver that fate. Cain Ashby, revealed as the elusive Aristotle Dumas, had sought redemption in the most unlikely of places, and in doing so, had drawn the gaze of someone with lethal intent. And now, that threat was no longer hypothetical. It was real. It was imminent. And Chance, with a detective's instinct honed by trauma and training, knew the storm was already inside the gates. It hadn't taken long for Cain to reach out. Late one night, as most of the guests retreated to their rooms, Cain cornered him in the chateau's conservatory, his voice low, eyes restless. "I need you to help me," he said. "Someone's trying to kill me. And I think they're already here." Chance didn't flinch. "Why now?" he asked. "What did you do to make them want you dead?" Cain looked away. "Maybe it's not what I did. Maybe it's what I know." And with that, the line between protector and target began to blur. Chance agreed to investigate, not because he trusted Cain, but because someone had to keep the chaos from boiling over, and because walking away never sat well with him. But as the pieces began to move, the danger deepened. Chance had been invited to Nice because of his past as a federal agent, because of his unique skill set, and perhaps, because someone knew he would do exactly what he was doing now, dig until the truth came out, even if it killed him. He started with the security systems. Hours of missing footage. Staff with falsified backgrounds. Communication logs scrubbed clean. Someone had covered their tracks with the kind of precision that didn't just suggest experience, it screamed government-level operation. Or worse, private networks powerful enough to operate beyond oversight. Then came the threats. Anonymous messages. A phone call in the middle of the night. The sound of breathing on the other end. The subtle but unmistakable sensation of being followed, even inside the supposedly secure grounds of the chateau. Chance didn't panic. He prepared. But even the best trained instincts couldn't shield him from everything. He knew that the deeper he pushed, the closer he drew to the bullet meant for Cain. And still, he pushed. As guests began to fracture into camps of loyalty, suspicion, and fear, Phyllis and Sharon warned Chance about the feeling of déjà vu that had settled like a fog over the castle. It reminded them of Martin Laurent. Of captivity. Of cameras in the walls. "This isn't just about Cain," Phyllis whispered one night. "This is about control. The kind that doesn't end when the lights go out." Sharon added, "Whoever's doing this, they're not just cleaning up loose ends. They're rewriting the narrative." Chance took their words to heart. And suddenly, Cain's paranoia didn't seem so irrational. The list of suspects grew: rival investors, enemies from the Dumas network, Tucker McCall with his connections to international holdings, even someone from the inside, someone at Newman or Chancellor with something to hide. And then there were the new arrivals. Unfamiliar faces who claimed to be guests of guests, staff who couldn't remember what floor they worked on, names that didn't match records. And through it all, Cain remained elusive. Helpful, but never transparent. Grateful, but never unguarded. It was as if he too feared what might happen if Chance got too close. Because the truth, once fully unearthed, might destroy not just reputations, but lives. Then came the night that would change everything. A private meeting was arranged. Chance insisted on it. A secluded study, removed from the main wings, just Cain and Chance. No one else. The plan was simple. Lay out what Cain knew, and finally uncover the identity of the person who wanted him dead. But someone else got there first. As Chance entered the room, the lights flickered. A sound, a whisper of motion, came from behind the curtains. He turned just in time to see a figure step out of the shadows, a glint of metal in their hand. Gun. Silencer. Not aimed at him, at Kane. In that split second, instinct overtook thought. Chance lunged. The shot fired. The silence that followed was deafening. The attacker fled. Kane ducked behind a chair, unharmed. But Chance collapsed. A clean shot to the chest. Not immediately fatal. But deep. As Kane called for help, Sharon and Nick rushed in, followed by Victor and Phyllis, the horror on their faces mirrored in Claire's scream from the hallway. Chance's blood pooled on the floor, his breathing ragged, his eyes struggling to focus. Nick dropped beside him, pressing his hands to the wound. "Stay with me," he begged. "Stay with us." Chance coughed, eyes locking with Kane. "Tell the truth, don't let them bury it." And then darkness. The hours that followed were a blur of ambulances, flashing lights, a cordoned perimeter, and furious arguments with local authorities. Kane was taken into protective custody. Victor began issuing private orders to sweep the castle for evidence. Sharon sat with Phyllis in stunned silence, both women staring at the blood that refused to come out of the marble. Lily wept in Devon's arms, while Abby demanded answers no one could give her. And by morning, the news had reached Genoa City. Chance Chancellor, detective, son, father, protector, had died in the line of duty. Not in a uniform. Not on official business. But as the only man willing to step between justice and the bullet that tried to silence it. His sacrifice would haunt them all. And it would change everything. Kane, now publicly exposed and officially targeted, would have to decide whether to come clean or continue spinning lies to protect what remained of his empire. Victor would unleash every resource he had to find the assassin. Sharon and Phyllis, now tied forever to another trauma, would have to wrestle with how much of it they could still carry. And Abby, Chance's wife, his anchor, would return to Genoa City with a flag draped over the last piece of the man she loved. But what Chance left behind was not just grief. It was momentum. A demand for answers. And in his name, they would find them. No matter who had to fall. The chateau had never been quieter. After the chaos of gunshots, screaming, and frantic emergency calls, the silence that followed Chance Chancellor's shooting settled over the estate like a suffocating fog. Guests who had once clinked champagne glasses and debated market acquisitions now spoke in hushed tones, if at all. The corridors that had echoed with laughter just days ago now bore the weight of collective shock. Outside the estate, a French ambulance had pulled away under armed escort, carrying a man whose fate hung by the thinnest of threads. Inside, Kane Ashby sat in a locked room, staring at blood still drying on his sleeve. He hadn't meant for this to happen. Not to Chance. Not to the one man who had actually tried to help him. But as he sat there, his hands trembling despite every ounce of discipline he'd once possessed as Dumas, Kane realized that he may have just condemned Chance to die. And worse, he may have dragged the only good man left into a war he never truly understood. It hadn't been personal. Or at least that's what Kane kept telling himself. He hadn't summoned Chance to France out of malice, but out of desperation. Yet desperation had a price. And now, someone had paid it with their life. The news of Chance's death didn't come immediately. For hours, Victor, Sharon, Phyllis, and Nick waited with held breath, pacing, arguing, blaming, and praying. Abby remained silent, her expression unreadable as she sat outside the chateau's private infirmary, hands folded in prayer, though her eyes remained dry. She had cried once, when she saw the blood soaking through Chance's shirt. Now she could not. Not until she knew. But when the doctor finally emerged, removing his cap and shaking his head with that subtle, damning movement, everything shattered. "He didn't make it," the doctor said, his voice grave. "I'm sorry." Abby collapsed forward, sobbing into her hands, as Sharon rushed to her side. Nick punched the wall so hard his knuckles split. And Victor. Victor simply turned and walked away, his silence the loudest scream of them all. Back in the secure room, Kane was told by the inspector. Not gently. Not with compassion. He's dead, the officer said, not out of cruelty but because in his mind, the man now weeping silently before him had blood on his hands, whether or not he pulled the trigger. The detective is dead, Mr. Ashby. You brought him into this. And now you answer for it. Kane didn't argue. He couldn't. The image of Chance diving between him and the silenced bullet replayed in his mind with cruel clarity. The sound of the body hitting the ground. The expression of stunned betrayal on Chance's face, not because Kane had failed him, but because Kane had not seen it coming. He had dragged a good man into a killing field under the guise of friendship. And now that man was gone. Elsewhere, Lily collapsed when the news reached her. Damien's murder had already left her unmoored, and now, with Chance dead, she saw the cracks forming faster than she could bear. This has to end, she whispered to Devon. People are dying. This has to stop. Devon nodded, but his eyes were elsewhere, watching Kane being escorted by police through the chateau halls. It will, he said. Even if I have to end it myself. Phyllis and Sharon, meanwhile, spiraled. Chance had listened to them. Had believed their warnings about surveillance, about Martin, about the twisted echoes of the past repeating themselves. And now, with him dead, they both felt complicit, another man caught in the trauma that never seemed to loosen its grip on them. He died because of us, Sharon murmured. Because he believed what we told him. Phyllis shook her head, her voice hoarse. He died because someone wanted Kane dead. And that someone is still here. Victor convened a private meeting that evening. Just family. Just strategy. He informed them that he would not be waiting for French authorities to solve the crime. We take care of our own, he said coldly. We find who pulled that trigger. And we destroy them. Nick agreed. So did Devon. But it was Abby who surprised them all. I want to speak to Kane, she said. Alone. No one argued. She found him in the chateau's holding suite, sitting on a cot, his face pale, his eyes hollow. He didn't look at her when she entered. You got him killed, she said. You asked him for help, and now he's gone. Kane didn't reply. She stepped closer. Do you even care? Do you even understand what you've done? Finally, he looked up. I do, he whispered. More than you'll ever know. She slapped him. Hard. You don't get to mourn him, she spat. You don't get to cry. He gave his life for you. And I will never forgive you for that. She turned and walked away. And Kane, for the first time since taking on the Dumas persona, felt completely alone. The funeral was planned in Genoa City within days. A full police honor. Closed casket. Hundreds in attendance. Sharon gave the eulogy. Phyllis read a letter he had written years ago. Abby didn't speak. She simply stood at the grave long after everyone else had gone, whispering apologies into the wind, and promising their son that his father had been a hero. That he had died doing the right thing. And that she would never let him be forgotten. Back in France, the investigation deepened. The assassin had vanished. But not without clues. Surveillance footage, traced emails, and an intercepted payment trail led back to a familiar name, a former associate of the Dumas operation. Someone who had disappeared years ago. Someone with reason to fear Kane's reappearance. The story wasn't over. The blood hadn't dried. And Genoa City would feel the ripple effects for years to come. But for now, there was only grief. Only silence. And the memory of a man who never stopped believing in justice. Even when it cost him everything. Phyllis Summers had always seen herself as someone who could spot an opportunity a mile away. And then outmaneuver, outwit, and outshine anyone standing in her path. She had clawed her way out of scandal, disgrace, and isolation more times than most people had had second chances. So when Cain Ashby, now revealed as the infamous Aristotle Dumas, offered her 10 minutes of his time in the privacy of the chateau's rooftop library, she saw it not as a courtesy, but as the first step in her next triumphant comeback. As she poured 2 glasses of aged scotch with practiced elegance, she moved like someone already celebrating a victory, not realizing she was moments away from a crushing miscalculation. You know, she began, handing him a glass with a confident smile, I have to say, I've been deeply impressed with everything you've built under the Dumas name. You didn't just reinvent yourself, you constructed an empire out of shadow and silence. That takes vision. Cain took the glass but didn't drink. He simply watched her. Listened. Measured. And said nothing. Phyllis mistook the silence for intrigue. Which is why I think Genoa City might be ready for a new chapter of Aristotle Dumas. Or Cain Ashby, depending on how you want to spin it. She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice into that seductive business whisper she had perfected over decades. And I can help with that transition. I know the terrain. I know the players. You want reintegration? I can clear the path. Cain raised an eyebrow but still didn't speak. Phyllis, emboldened by what she thought was curiosity, pushed further. Chancellor Industries is the key, obviously. The name still carries weight, and frankly, no one knows what's happening with leadership now. Billy's unfocused. Devon's distracted. Nikki's defensive. And you, well, you've got the resources, but not the relationships. That's where I come in. She took a slow sip of her scotch, savoring the moment she thought she had turned the tide. But then Cain finally moved, setting the glass down, untouched, and leaning back in his chair. His eyes were calm. Icy. The kind of stillness that came before a storm. You think I need your help navigating Genoa City? He asked softly, almost amused. Phyllis, momentarily thrown off by the shift in tone, responded quickly, I think everyone needs allies. And I can be yours. He smiled, but it wasn't warm. You're offering to help me reintegrate into a world I deliberately walked away from. A world I outgrew, Phyllis. You say Chancellor is the key, but let me ask you something, what exactly do you think I want from Chancellor? Phyllis hesitated. Control. Legacy. Validation. Power. He laughed, shaking his head. No. I already have all those things. And if I wanted Chancellor, I'd take it without your help, without anyone's. What you're offering is leverage you don't have, in a city you've been exiled from more times than I can count. The word sliced cleanly, but it was what he said next that fully shattered her illusion. You mentioned Chancellor. And you dropped that name like a trap. Hoping I'd bite. But it was Amanda who told me what really happened. Phyllis stiffened. Amanda? She just to relax, Cain interrupted. She didn't betray you. She assured me she never shared anything confidential. Which is why I know Billy told you. That's the only explanation. Because you wouldn't have known otherwise. The confidence that had carried Phyllis into the room now began to crumble. She tried to recover. Well, maybe I know more than you think I do. Cain leaned forward now, voice low. Or maybe you know exactly what I want you to know. Let me make this very clear. If you came here expecting to be my handler, my fixer, or my golden ticket back into the social circle of Genoa City, you miscalculated. Severely. Phyllis swallowed hard, her throat dry despite the drink. The air in the room grew heavier with every passing second. Cain continued. You're smart, Phyllis. Ambitious. Dangerous even, when cornered. I respect that. But you're not indispensable. Not to me. Not to Chancellor. And not to whatever narrative you've constructed in your head about how this story ends. Phyllis's hands curled slightly at her sides. She hadn't come here to be humiliated. She had survived men like Jeremy Stark, conspiracies with Tucker McCall, and humiliations from Diane Jenkins. She wasn't about to be dismissed by Kane Ashby, no matter how expensive his suit or how carefully he whispered his threats. "You know," she said through gritted teeth, "people might not trust me, but they always underestimate me. And that's how I win." Kane stood. "No, Phyllis. That's how you survive. But this game? This isn't survival. This is conquest. And you're not at the top of the board." She left the room moments later, her heels clicking sharply across the marble floor, her chin held high, but inside, she burned. Not just with embarrassment, but with something far more dangerous, motivation. Down the hall, Amanda Sinclair watched her pass with a flicker of concern. She hadn't meant to betray Phyllis. But she also hadn't expected Kane to twist the narrative so cleanly in his favor. Amanda had warned Billy not to speak out of turn. He hadn't listened. And now, the board was shifting again. And somewhere in the shadows, Victor Newman was listening. Always listening. Because even in private negotiations, even in humiliating dismissals, even in fleeting moments of vulnerability, every move mattered. And Victor had just seen Kane win a round. But not the war.